can sometimes feel like a lot, but you don't have to do it alone. I strongly believe that we're stronger together. Here, we're going to slow down, have real talks, make sense of things together, and explore ways to intentionally grow the life you want. We're going to talk about mental and physical health, relationships, money, work, and community. Welcome to Rooted in Intention with me, Karina Gomez. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode. So happy that you're joining. Today, we're going to be talking about ADHD, and I am joined by Dr. Janice Castro, who is a psychologist, a speaker, and also the host of the Latine ADHD podcast. So we have some expertise coming in, and Dr. Janice, thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, I'm really excited to be here to have our conversation. And yeah, I'm super happy to be.
Yay. Okay. So I always like starting off with this, and I think I just love hearing people's stories. Can you share a little bit of what got you interested in becoming a psychologist, and then especially talking about ADHD on a whole podcast?
Yeah, thank you for that question. So, what got me interested in pursuing a career as a psychologist is my desire to want to give back to my community in a way that aligned with my values. And so something that I cherish a lot is being able to have the opportunity to talk about mental health in a way that is digestible. I think
Mhm.
because there's so much stigma around it. And there's a very big need, especially within the Latina community. So when I was in grad school, when I decided to pursue grad school in the first place, I knew I wanted like some kind of career in counseling, but I because I'm a first generation college graduate, I didn't know what that was going to look like. But with the support of mentors, I was able to find my path, and I learned about how getting a PhD in counseling psychology could give me the opportunity to provide clinical or therapy services to the Latina community in Spanish. So, as a bilingual Latina, I thought this could be a really great opportunity. And I think what really like lit a fire in me was when I was in undergrad and I was taking psychology classes, I kept hearing that there was limited research around mental health or psychology within the Latina community across a lot of marginalized communities. But particularly, I was thinking to myself, there is a need, just given what I've experienced growing up in my community. There is definitely a need for mental health. And the conversations were not happening, the research wasn't there. And so then I thought, this is my way to give back. This is my way to be able to help out in a way that I think taps into also my strengths. So yeah, I pursued the career, and I learned a lot throughout grad school about what do I like, what do I don't like. And by the time I got my license as a psychologist, I found out what I do like after a lot of this is not what I like, this is not what I like. And working with the ADHD population is, I think, the area where right now I feel so passionate about. And I also try to give myself space to explore. I think that's what's so beautiful about having a career as a counseling psychologist or like psychology in general is like there's so many different things we could study, so many different populations we can work with. And I decided to work with the ADHD population because I deeply resonated with the feelings that often ADHD folks experience, which is feeling like an outsider or having to work harder in systems that were not built for you. And so I learned during my training about ADHD during I did a postdoctoral fellowship, and it really opened up my eyes because I had heard about neurodiversity, but not in that much depth until I got my specialized training. And as somebody who does not have ADHD, I noticed I kept gravitating towards these clients, and I was like, why is that? I had to sit down and really reflect, what is it about this community? Because often people work with people who they identify with, like, if you're like, for example, from some specific identity, you gravitate towards working with people who also have that identity. So I also recognize my privilege, and I try to keep myself in check with that privilege of somebody who doesn't have ADHD but specializes in it.
Mhm.
But yeah, I gravitate towards it because I deeply empathize with the experiences of being in these systems where I've often been people pleasing, challenges with setting boundaries, being burned out multiple times, and feeling like I just don't fit in.
Mhm.
And those are very common experiences for folks with ADHD. And I think that being the daughter of immigrants, being a first generation college graduate, having gone to predominantly white institutions throughout my career as a Latina, I was moving through these systems that were not built for me. And so, yeah, I think just those experiences, it's what's helped me see the parallels in my experiences and why I love working with folks in ADHD and being able to support that specific community.
Yeah, that's a beautiful story. And yeah, I think I resonate with what you were saying of sometimes you figure out in what direction you want to go by knowing the directions you don't want to go, because I feel like that was my path as well.
It's so challenging. You
Yeah.
just want to figure it out
Mhm.
already.
It's like putting a puzzle piece together is what I've come to. We're slowly putting the puzzle piece of our life together. And one thing that's interesting that you mentioned that you don't have ADHD, but you saw some similar experiences with people that do have it. And I think that's interesting because in my own journey, I've had the privilege of going to therapy, and at some point I actually thought I might have ADHD. And I was talking to my therapist, and she was actually sharing how there's a lot of overlap with symptoms of ADHD and things like trauma, and how oftentimes there might be different things that are contributing to how we're experiencing the world. So, yeah, I think that there's a lot of possibility for overlaps, not just in different diagnoses, but within our experiences as well.
Yeah, yeah, I appreciate you bringing that up because I think there was definitely a trend during the pandemic where a lot of people started seeing on social media, on the internet about, is this ADHD? Do I have ADHD? And it made sense at the time because we were going through this collective trauma, whether it was that you were experiencing the collective trauma because of the pandemic, or maybe you have your own history of trauma. And those experiences, some of those symptoms of trauma, like for example, this is getting very clinical, but like when I think about PTSD and diagnosing that, or for example, anxiety, that was something that also got very heightened because we were living in, so much uncertainty during the pandemic, the start of it. People who have anxiety, there's symptoms that like it kind of looks like ADHD and you're trying to figure out, is this ADHD or not? And so, yeah, it can feel so confusing, and it can lead people to wonder, is this it, or is this something else? And I think that's what's so great about being able to talk to a professional about it, right? Because yeah, I agree with you. I think it is a privilege to be able to go to therapy. And I think also it takes a lot of courage because you're asking for help. And when I think about the like getting that kind of support and allowing yourself to open up to a stranger, when we're often taught to just kind of keep things at home, like, you don't talk about things about the family with others because there's a sense of like loyalty and being protective of our
Mhm.
unit, our family. It can be really hard to be like, I'm going to talk to this person because I need a different perspective.
Yeah, definitely. I think also because I think I was very fortunate with the therapist
that I connected with the first time around. I didn't even pick my therapist. It was someone that was assigned to me, but
Oh.
I ended up resonating with her. She was also Latina. So it ended up just working out because I feel like she understood my cultural background and some of those, how would you say, things that are common within Latino families and
Mm.
maybe normal to us, but not necessarily within other cultures. And when I talked to some other people that also seeked support for mental health, I also heard some bad experiences that folks had. And I think that's why I share with people. It's just like, I think I got lucky with the person that I was connected with at first, but it
Mm.
might just be one of those things where it's like trial and error of finding the person that you do resonate with because yeah, once you do like actually do therapy because you have to do therapy with someone that you resonate with, I think it can be so powerful. But
Mm.
yeah. Okay. So we kind of just dived into a different conversation, kind of related.
It's all interconnected in some
Yeah,
ways.
yes. But for folks that aren't as familiar with ADHD, can you just give us an overview of what is ADHD?
Yeah, that's a great question because I didn't know about it until, like I mentioned, I got it in my training. So, ADHD has different presentations. Some people have the inattentive presentation. So, that's one, I guess, like profile of what ADHD looks like. There's also hyperactive. And then there's also combined, which is like both inattentive and hyperactive symptoms that present. And the term ADHD also is something that's evolved throughout the years. And it's gone from assuming that it was only present in kids to then being called ADD, like attention deficit disorder, to then realizing, oh, but what about the hyperactive piece? To then now it's called the attention deficit hyperactive disorder, ADHD. And with those different presentations, it's important to recognize that when you've met one person with ADHD, you have only met one person with ADHD, because even folks who may have ADHD inattentive may present the symptoms differently than the next person who also has ADHD inattentive. And that's because you also want to take into consideration the environment that you're in and that you grew up in. I think that often it gets looked at as if it's a problem, and I recognize that the label itself is what makes it sound like a problem, right? Like it had the last D in ADHD is disorder.
Mm-hmm.
And the inattentive label, it makes it seem like, oh, you have attention problems. The hyperactive makes it seem like, oh, you're too active, you're too much, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, those are, though, the clinical terms that get used when you talk to a psychiatrist, a psychologist, just to name a few different like professions. And yeah, I would say that with that in mind, it's also recognizing that it's a different way of learning and thinking. And everybody has unique brains, and who's to say what brain is better than another?
Mm-hmm.
So you can't say, oh, because I don't have ADHD, my brain is better than person who has ADHD. I think that we've pathologized it a lot because it makes it easier to understand, oh, this person doesn't think the way that the rest of the society does because there's such a small percentage. But it's actually the systems and structures in our society, specifically I'm talking about the US, that cater to folks who don't have ADHD.
Mm-hmm.
And when I think about inattentive like presentation, there is challenges with forgetfulness and losing things easily. It can show up in relationships, for example, like when you forget to text back, you forget to call back, you missed your doctor's appointment because you forgot it to put it in your calendar. And then there's also the and that's just a few examples, right? With the hyperactive, it shows up as maybe restlessness, like possibly like having a hard time sitting down for hours.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes I think about how we often think about it as like fidgeting, like feeling restless, like you have to have something to stimulate. And, I see it as you're engaging with your environment. Like when you're touching things, when you're engaging with your senses, that's very human of us. It's our nervous system wanting to do something to soothe, but it can easily be seen as like, oh, that's weird. Like, why do you always have to like tap your foot, or why are you always like having something in your hand?
Yeah.
So yeah, and then folks who have combined type, again, it's going to look differently because it's different symptoms. Some people have it more like it can feel louder. So what I
Mhm.
mean is like some people have ADHD that can feel very intense, like it can feel very obvious. And then there's some people who grew up not getting the diagnosis because it got overlooked, because maybe the symptoms, they like barely meet criteria. They meet
Mhm.
it, but barely. And maybe that's why they were overcompensating and didn't get diagnosed at all, or it was just their environment, like it just catered to them, so the diagnosis didn't really show up because they weren't having issues with the way that they think, or the ways that they learn were just supported.
Mhm, mhm. I think to what you were saying around how ADHD is referred to clinically, especially with names like disorders, and I can imagine that someone can really, I guess, feel some shame with getting a label that has something like disorder. And I think there's so much power in language, and maybe some of the mental health
Yeah.
things that we've talked about need a little bit of a change around that. But I think that there could also be a power for the diagnosis, because I imagine that with that, people are going to have better understanding of themselves and what they might be needing. What are some of those things that you've seen, especially for someone that might have gotten an ADHD diagnosis down the line? How has it helped them?
That's a really great question. And I appreciate you also bringing up this idea around language and labels, because even I almost forgot about the other D in ADHD is deficit. Like
Mhm.
your attention deficit. When that's the label that we've put here in the US in our diagnostic manual for clinicians and doctors who diagnose. But culturally, outside of the US, I remember learning that I believe it's in, is it Australia? There is this native community, like the indigenous community, that they have their own term for ADHD. They don't use that label,
Mhm.
and I believe it's the word is Aroreretini, and it means your attention goes to different things or to many
Mhm.
things.
Mhm.
And that embraces this experience that folks with ADHD have. It embraces their unique brains
Mhm.
instead of calling it a deficit.
Yeah.
So yeah, I just wanted to acknowledge that. I agree with you. I think the diagnosis name itself needs a change, but we're not there yet. And so what I do see when people come in, like when I see my clients for therapy, or just engaging with folks in the community who have ADHD, because anytime I share that I specialize, if they have ADHD, they're like, "Oh, I have it," and I'm like, "Oh." So people open up very quickly when they hear I specialize in it.
Yeah.
And something that is very common is folks with ADHD carry so much shame. It's
Mhm.
so heavy in terms of how there's a lot of self-critical talk, a lot of self-blame, a lot of pressure to do better, to do more, to just push through. And I think those experiences are the relationships that they have with themselves and the messages that they've heard that they've internalized. And that can be really hard to get through. The key is self compassion. Self compassion is what's going to help with a lot of that shame, a lot of that self critical talk. And it's hard because it's so many years of unlearning or reframing
Mhm.
what you thought was, maybe I'm just lazy, maybe I'm not good enough, maybe I'm not meant for school, maybe I'm not meant for that. Because when they go a long time being undiagnosed, everybody puts these labels of like, oh, they're just, they're just like that. Like
Mhm.
they're just always daydreaming. They're just not, they don't care about school, or like they've always been messy. And I think especially within the Latinx community, when we think about parents who immigrate from other countries to the US, because there's also such a huge stigma with mental health across Latin America, then it makes it hard when you're trying to adapt into a new culture as an immigrant, and you want your children to adapt quickly to be able to just, succeed, right?
Mhm.
And with the acculturation stress that can happen with immigration or being bicultural, if you're a child who was born here but have immigrant parents, is that there's this challenge with understanding how to be able to support yourself. And I think that then parents may see it as like, oh, this child is just being disrespectful.
Mhm.
And often within the Latina community, the cultural values of respect are really important. Like when you think about respecting your elders, respecting your parents, right? And so the moment that ADHD shows up in a child who is undiagnosed, for example, in the Latina community, the parent may be like, oh, like no me está obedeciendo. Like they're not
Mhm.
listening to me. They're not being respectful. They need to be respectful because that's really important. And these children carry those messages with them into adulthood. And I think that once they get the diagnosis, it brings this aha moment for some. Some people are like, yeah, I knew it, because again, the different presentations, for some people it's very obvious. They just didn't
Mhm.
have a name for it. But aside from just getting a label of like, okay, I got it, now this makes more sense when I think back to my life, there's also grief. For some folks, the grief shows up as how life could have been different if you would have gotten the support that you needed at school, at home, so that you could do the things that you wanted to do, right? Because it is about just thinking and learning differently. So, like, maybe it means getting extra time on tests.
Mhm.
Maybe it means your parents incorporating a lot of breaks in between homework
Mhm.
sessions to be able to help sustain interest in the task that's really challenging. Because ADHD brains are very interest driven.
Mhm.
And so I think that the grief comes from accepting that life could have been different. Here I am now, and I can't change that. And then also, I think that it brings empowerment. It could allow you to start thinking about, who do you want to disclose this to? Who do you feel comfortable telling? So then that way you can get the support that you're needing. It could be asking for work accommodations, because since ADHD is considered a learning disability, you can reach out to your job and let them know about this learning disability if you have the formal diagnosis,
Mhm.
to be able to get accommodations at work. It could be that you get your own office instead of being like cubicles next to each other, because maybe those people are too distracting. It could be that you get breaks in between your work meetings, because it's really hard to just constantly go, go, go. It could mean getting reoccurring meetings with maybe your supervisor or your boss to help with accountability and prioritizing tasks.
Mhm.
So that could feel very empowering. Also, bringing it up to certain people in your life that you feel comfortable being vulnerable with, because ADHD not only impacts your work or your career, it also impacts your relationships with the people around you, and it impacts the relationship you have with yourself. So it's a beautiful journey. It's an honor for me to be able to witness folks who learn how to navigate and support their ADHD brains. And there's some really heavy conversations around the shame and the self critical talk and the grief that comes with getting a late diagnosis. So, yeah, sorry, I feel like I rambled on that one.
No, those were all great messages. And I think some of the key notes that I'm taking is of the power that that has for how to work with their brain and how to
Yeah.
ask for help at work, at school with like, this is just how my brain works.
Hmm.
How can we change the system to what you were saying earlier to accommodate for me, which might not look like how the rest of the population functions. And
Yeah.
yeah. And then to the shame piece, yeah, like I imagine that that's so powerful this whole time. You're just like, oh, like I can't do that because I'm lazy. And then being like, oh, no, you can't do that because your brain is different. And that's okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, definitely. It's working with your brain. It's not about being lazy. It's often, very often when I work with clients with ADHD, they they don't lack motivation. It's the structure and the system that they have in place that's not working with their brain. It's working against it, and then they interpret that as I'm not motivated enough. I need to push through, but then that's how we burn out.
So, what are some of those things that people might want to consider? Because if I imagine if someone's blaming themselves and saying, oh, I'm just XYZ and that's why I can't do these things, at what point do people usually reach where they're like, maybe I should actually look into ADHD and seeing if this is the cause for some of the troubles and the issues that I'm having in life?
Yeah, often when I have clients come through, it's because their ADHD does feel louder, where the things that they used to be able to do, all of a sudden it's become more challenging. And they're trying to figure out what happened because whatever they were doing before was working for them, and now it's not working. And it's affecting some area of their life, whether it's their romantic relationship, their work, school, or even organization and cleanliness.
Hmm.
And so usually that's definitely where folks will come in. It could also be that there is this realization that maybe they do have ADHD or they did get diagnosed as a kid, but nothing was done about it. Like
Mm.
they didn't really take the accommodations or their parents didn't encourage it or just, yeah, it was, they just kind of fell through the cracks. But then all of a sudden, they're in a moment where they want to explore how is ADHD impacting me? How does this show up? Because you don't learn about ADHD if you're not a clinician. And even when I say, like, I know I'm a psychologist and, like, yes, I learned about ADHD, but I had to seek out a specialized, like, site to train in ADHD. If I didn't go to that site to get specialized training in ADHD, I couldn't I didn't really learn it in my grad program that much. Like I knew the diagnosis and the symptoms, but I didn't know how to look out for it or how to tease it apart to see is this ADHD or is this anxiety or
Mhm.
PTSD or all three.
Mhm.
So I think what I appreciate is I'm able to also provide that psychoeducation because folks who maybe were diagnosed at a young age but didn't really do much about it all of a sudden feel like, oh, I something is happening. I think my ADHD is get starting to get in the way of something that I want. Or there is situations where like, I think I have ADHD, but I'm coming in because I have anxiety. And I'm like, okay, well, you think you have ADHD and you've been diagnosed maybe with anxiety. Let's see if ADHD is present. And anxiety is a lot easier to diagnose than ADHD.
Mhm.
And so when if there is an ADHD diagnosis, it helps us understand also the anxiety because sometimes what happens is they're using the anxiety to fuel themselves to do the work that is so hard to
Hmm.
feel motivated to do, like the worries or the sense of urgency. It's what pushes them, and sometimes the anxiety will start to go down a little bit once they have clarity around how to support their ADHD.
Mhm. That really gets me thinking about which came first, the chicken or the egg? It's just like, do you have anxiety or do you have ADHD? Is the ADHD causing the anxiety? So that's a very
Mm,
interesting way to think about that. And I think you mentioned like a very important point of someone might have gotten a diagnosis at a young age, but the parents maybe didn't pursue doing anything with that. And I can imagine that there's multiple things at play, just like the parents themselves not really knowing and understanding ADHD, and
yeah.
also to what you were saying earlier around I think just some shame still around talking about mental health. So, can you share a little bit of why it's so important for someone that might have received or that has a child that has received ADHD at a young age to take that into consideration? And can you also speak to a little bit of where does ADHD come from? Because I think one of the things that I've heard sometimes is that it's like this made up thing and it's not something that has to be accommodated for.
Yeah. So accommodating children with ADHD can make a really big difference. I think, especially when I think about the struggles that parents have with wanting their children to be respectful, to follow directions, to do well in school, to get along with their friends, their family members, and the way that parents may perceive ADHD could be that, oh, it's just like, it's at school, like they're gonna support them at school, or they're gonna, like, the teachers have to handle it. But it shows up in different ADHD when it gets diagnosed. It's not just something that happens at school. You have to see how it shows up in multiple environments. If it's not showing up in multiple environments, that's a cue to step back and ask, is this really ADHD? Because the way it shows up at home might look different than it does at school. Or again, it could be multiple diagnoses. But I think when children do get the support that they need at a young age, it helps them be more, or feel more successful at school and at home, in their relationships, the way that they give themselves more compassion and grace for mistakes. Because that's one of the things that often folks with ADHD struggle with, is that they feel shame around mistakes, like, oh, I forgot to call back, oh, I forgot to submit that assignment, oh, I forgot to clean again. And so that can be really hard to sit with. And if at a young age you're recognizing, oh, this is the ADHD showing up, how can I work with it? How can I make cleaning a little bit easier? How can I break down my school task into smaller chunks so it doesn't feel overwhelming and paralyzes you from wanting to do anything at all? So, if parents could, for example, step in with, like, giving the child breaks in between homework assignments, making it fun, making it approachable, step by step, but like starting with little steps. At schools, being able to support them in providing that extra testing time, or them being able to take the test in a separate room so that they're not distracted by all the people around them. It could also mean nowadays having support through some technology assistance.
Mhm.
So often I can't speak too much to what like elementary, middle school looks like, but when I've worked with college students, there are these programs that are text to speech or speech to text, where you can read while you can hear the audio playing,
Mhm.
and that helps more with the concentration and really comprehending the information. And some people, when they take notes, it can look like drawings, doodling, using different colors. It doesn't look necessarily as straight as like they teach you in school. I remember in college they taught us Cornell notes. Have you ever heard of that?
Yes. Yep.
Yes. So I learned about Cornell notes when I went to college, but not everybody has to take notes that way. And it's not the best, it's not going to work for every brain. But back then, I didn't even know ADHD was the thing because I was an undergrad. But again, these systems are built for people without ADHD. So then That's where the accommodations would be really helpful, so that you can do well, especially in those lecture halls that are super long, like an hour and 15 minutes,
Yeah.
or just sitting through a lecture where it's just PowerPoint after PowerPoint. Like ADHD brains are interest driven. They benefit from like stimulation, things that excite them. And so it's about making learning fun. So, regarding the ADHD diagnosis, yes, there's some people who think it's an excuse, it's not real. And I think it's one, probably because we haven't talked about it a lot in the past. And then also because as of right now, there isn't a large percentage of people who have it. In the US, when you combine both children and adults, the research has shown that about 20 to 22 million people have ADHD.
Wow.
That's children and adults combined. When you break it down and you look at the data regarding how many children in the US, like children as in like between ages like 5 to 17, it's about 7 million children.
Mm.
So that means across the US, kids who have ADHD fall under 11 to 12%.
Mhm.
When you look at adults, it's even smaller. Adults, so meaning like 18 and over, are about 6% of folks in the US have ADHD as adults. So 6% is not a lot. And it's important to take into consideration that a lot of women and a lot of people of color have been misdiagnosed or underdiagnosed
Mhm.
historically with and so we're starting to see a rise in a lot of women and people of color who are late diagnosed.
Mhm.
And that's because of the misdiagnosis or underdiagnosed. And it's really unfortunate because when they get overlooked, because women and people of color are of marginalized identities. The diagnosis was developed and the symptoms were understood with the symptoms that show up in white boys, like little white boys. And then, of course, now we know that it still continues into adulthood, just looks different. And I want to say it's about maybe 70 to 80% of it is genetics. So often you'll find that if you have ADHD, it could be that your mom or your dad have it, or somewhere down your lineage somebody had ADHD. There's also that small percentage that is connected to prenatal or perinatal birth challenges. So, for example, one of the ways that ADHD could develop is if during birth the child is losing oxygen, so there's complications with
Mm.
the birth. ADHD could develop because of that. It's much smaller of a percentage compared to like the 70 to 80% that's genetic. But yeah, there could be challenges with or complications with during birth, before birth, if the mother has, like, for example, there's substance use, high stress, trauma. All of those things could also put ADHD at a higher vulnerability. So, like, if ADHD already runs in your genes, and then on top of that, during the pregnancy, there's potential substance use or high stress, it makes your likelihood of having ADHD even higher. But
Mm.
it isn't necessarily that like one specific thing is linked to it.
That makes me think of epigenetics, or essentially how the environment can trigger specific genes to either like turn
Mhm.
on and turn off, to what you're saying, that there's that
Yeah.
genetic component. And when I
Hmm.
think of stress, sorry, I have a public health background, so it makes me think of oxidative stress and how that is, again, potentially impacting which genes are expressed.
Yeah. Yeah. I've never heard of oxidative stress. What is that?
Oxidative stress. Yeah. It's how stress shows up and essentially targets your cells. So, yeah, there's some great research to go down, because
Yeah.
oxidative stress is one of those things that I first learned about when diving into why health outcomes looked different across different races in the US,
Hmm.
even though you take things into account like socioeconomic status. So even though people might be earning the same amount, you would think that they have access to the same like privileges, grocery stores, and that type of thing. But the data was still showing like, particularly Black people still had some health outcomes, even though they like raised their income levels. And part of the studies that were coming out were around understanding stress and microaggressions and how that still impacts your body. So
Yeah.
that's where my mind went. Yeah.
Yeah. That makes total sense. And as you talk about stress, one of the things about ADHD is when you have the diagnosis, you are more vulnerable to stress. So things that perhaps someone who doesn't have ADHD navigates some stressful moment, they're able to navigate it and then get through it and then they're fine. Folks with ADHD, if they're experiencing something very stressful, it can feel very heightened very fast. And so it is something where it gets tricky because that's where a little bit of stress is good for us, but not too much to the point where it's chronic. And so I think, when you consider the experiences of Black folks, people of color, the microaggressions, when I think about the Latina community, you add on the experiences of acculturation stress, right? Of like adapting to this new environment. And that's not even taking socioeconomic status into consideration and being able to, meet your basic needs. And even just now, I think that communities of color, I think even just globally, not just within the US, are so dehumanized. And even though some of us carry privileges where we're not directly impacted by that, like you and I are able to sit here and have a podcast recording, right?
Mhm.
Um, it doesn't not impact us. It's still in the background. It's still something that we're carrying with us, even if we're still able to focus and have a conversation. So I just wanted to bring up, like, yeah, I agree. Stress can make a really big impact and in the development of a child, and also with ADHD they are more vulnerable to stress, and
Mhm.
so self-care is super important.
Yeah. That's such an interesting point around the stress and being more sensitive to it if you do have ADHD,
Hmm.
because I kind of think of a teacher that I actually had in high school. She was diagnosed with ADHD like in her 30s, and the only reason she found that out is because her younger son was diagnosed with ADHD. And then they're like, maybe you should get checked out as well. And I guess I was connecting the how someone might have undiagnosed ADHD already have that sensitivity to stress, which is then going to increase that likelihood that the kiddo might also have ADHD.
Yeah, definitely. And going back to like the genetics piece, that like often it is that if the child has ADHD, there's a higher likelihood that one of the parents have it too. And I think while we want to understand where's the root, it's also important to take a step back and question, why are we seeing it as a problem that needs to be solved?
I love that reframe.
Yeah, thank you. I try to remind myself of that often when I'm like focused in on trying to help my clients with like this problem of, feeling disorganized or problems that are showing up in the relationship. I'm like, wait, but also let's stop and acknowledge the strengths that also come with ADHD rather than seeing it as like, how do we fix these symptoms so that they go away? Because they're not going away. They
Uh-huh.
are a different way of thinking and learning. And who's to say what brain is better than another, right?
Mhm.
And so when we can work with the brain to support what it needs, man, my ADHD clients are some of the most creative, resilient, smartest people I have ever met.
That's so beautiful. And for people that might be listening that do have ADHD and are maybe having trouble finding what some of those strengths are, what would you tell them?
If you have ADHD and you're wanting to lean into your strengths, I think it's about being able to recognize what are some ways to support your brain so that you can see those strengths really shine, and being able to find that strength, they can see it in themselves because often when I talk to my ADHD clients, they're like, I know I can do this. I know the steps I need to take, but I just can't do it. I'm like, yeah, you know what you got to do. You can see it and you know you can do it, but there's just like one piece that's missing. So how do we get you to start that engine up, to get you building the momentum? And I think being able to have self-compassion, because having ADHD, having a learning disability in a world where it doesn't cater to it, it's really hard to embrace it and see it as like these are strengths when you're living in a world, in a society that says you're doing it wrong, you need to work faster, you need to just grind and hustle. And when you get those messages, it's really hard to be like, I'm going to make room for me, I'm going to do things differently, because generally as humans, we don't like to be outsiders. We want to fit in groups. And the moment we don't fit in, it feels uncomfortable, it feels shameful. But the more you can practice self compassion around, my brain thinks differently, and I am going to try to work with it, even if it looks different compared to my colleagues, compared to my peers. As long as you focus on what works best for you, those strengths will start to come out. And I think often because of the forgetfulness with ADHD, one thing that I really like to encourage is to write down your wins, writing down what was something great that happened for you this week. I sent out that email that I forgot to send out a month ago,
Yeah.
or I vacuumed my home. Like writing down those wins, because with ADHD they often forget things, and so they forget how many great things they've done or how
Mhm.
their strengths have shown up.
Yeah.
And the more self compassion you can practice, when you make mistakes, you forget things, or you say something and you blurt it out, because that's sometimes how ADHD shows up. Having that self compassion allows you to just kind of let it roll off your shoulder, take accountability for how you can show up next time, but that it's okay, because that's part of just learning more about yourself and building that confidence.
Yeah. So to summarize, learn how to accommodate for your brain,
Yeah.
practice self-compassion,
Mm-hmm.
write down your wins because again, going back to working with your brain, you have to remind yourself of how amazing you are if you do have
Yeah,
ADHD and you're having some of those difficulties.
that's right.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And I know you have a whole podcast dedicated to ADHD. And
Yes.
I'm curious if there's one episode from your podcast that has really just resonated with you and like stood out that you want to share a little bit more on here.
Yeah. Oh man, there's just so many episodes that cross my mind, especially when I think about the guests that I've had who bring so much knowledge and wisdom. It's so hard to choose one, but I have gotten some feedback on one of the episodes that is on motivation. And so I think that one would be a good one. Oh, okay. My season 2 finale, Unlocking Motivation and Beating Boredom.
Mm.
So that was when, because often clients come in saying, like, I'm struggling with my motivation. And it's not even that they're not motivated, it's that you have to build motivation. And I think often we just put this pressure on ourselves because we live in a capitalist society to just do it. Like, and you can't just do it. You have to build the momentum. And so yeah, I really liked that episode, and I've gotten some feedback about how it was helpful to think about the two different types of motivation that we have and how to tap into it
Two types for everyone or for people with ADHD?
for everyone.
Oh, that's interesting. I was like, I might go check out that episode. But
Yeah.
thank you, Dr. Janice, for joining me. And can you share about how people could find the podcast, how they can connect with you, how they can work with you?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for that question. So, with the podcast, it's called Latine ADHD. So, Latine ADHD. And you can find it on all platforms, including YouTube, for those who are visual learners and want to watch the episode with our faces, I guess, and captions. And I am also, aside from doing the podcast, I offer therapy services. So, as a licensed psychologist in California, I'm able to provide therapy to adults, and it is telehealth. So, you can live anywhere in California. So, you can find more information about my services through my website, which is drjanicecastro.com, and on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Instagram. You can also find me at DRJANICE Castro.
Wonderful. So now, folks, if you want to dive in even further, you could go down the rabbit hole, go listen to all of the ADHD podcast episodes. And if you guys enjoyed this episode, you have any questions, feel free to leave a review and let us know what you thought. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you for joining me for another episode of Rooted in Intention. Until next time, and remember to keep showing up for the life, relationship,